Picture a pirate who destroyed more than 400 ships in his lifetime and never once let alcohol touch his lips. Picture a man who could have his enemies executed within the hour, but first made them sit down and read from the Bible. This is not a rumor stitched together by drunk sailors telling tall tales in a tavern. This is documented, cross-referenced, court-recorded history, and it belongs to a man most people have never heard of, standing in the shadow of a fictional captain in eyeliner and a feathered hat. Everyone thinks they know pirates because of Jack Sparrow. Everyone thinks Captain Barbossa and the Black Pearl represent the peak of piracy on the high seas. They do not. The real record, the one written in captured logbooks and colonial trial transcripts and the terrified letters of governors who watched their trade routes collapse, belongs to a Welsh sailor named Bartholomew Roberts. History remembers him by a shorter, darker name, Black Bart, and by the time the sea finally took him, he had done something no pirate before or since has ever managed. He had become, by every measurable standard, the most successful pirate who ever lived. Today, we are going to take that record apart piece by piece. We are going to find out how a completely ordinary, rule-abiding sailor who spent 37 years of his life doing everything correctly became, in the span of 6 weeks, the most feared captain in the Atlantic. We are going to find out why his own crew, men who had chosen a life defined by lawlessness, willingly submitted to some of the strictest discipline ever enforced on a ship. And we are going to find out exactly how it ended, in a burst of grape shot off the coast of West Africa, in a moment so final that his own men threw his body into the sea before the enemy could even confirm they had killed him. This is the story the movies never told you. This is Bartholomew Roberts. Before we go further into the sand and the blood and the 6 weeks that changed everything, if stories like this, real history pulled straight out of the archive and put back together the way it actually happened, are the kind of thing you want more of, take 1 second and hit subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss the next one. Now back to the Atlantic in 1719. The man who never wanted to be a pirate to understand how strange Bartholomew Roberts's rise really was. You have to understand what kind of man he was before any of it happened. He was born John Roberts in 1682 in a small parish in Pembrokeshire on the southwestern coast of Wales. Almost nothing about his early life suggests a future criminal. He went to sea young, the way most working-class boys from Welsh coastal villages did, and by the time he was in his late 30s, he was exactly what colonial shipping companies wanted: reliable, experienced, sober, and unremarkable. He had spent nearly 4 decades on the water without a single documented act of lawlessness. He was, by every account that survives him, a careful and conservative man. He did not drink. He preferred tea. He kept himself clean and well-dressed even at sea, which other sailors apparently found slightly unusual. There is no version of this story where anyone who knew Roberts in 1718 would have predicted what he became in 1719. In June of 1719, Roberts was serving as third mate aboard a slave ship called the Princess, anchored off the coast of present-day Ghana at a trading post called Anomabu. This was the machinery of the Atlantic slave trade at its most routine and its most brutal. Ships waiting at anchor to take on human cargo bound for the plantations of the Caribbean and the American colonies. And on that particular day in June, the routine was interrupted. A pirate ship under the command of a Welsh former privateer named Howell Davis attacked the anchorage. Davis was already one of the most successful pirates operating off the West African coast, a man with a taste for elaborate deception, disguise, and audacious raids. He took the Princess, and along with the ship, he took her crew, including a 40-year-old third mate who had never in his career picked a fight with anyone. Roberts did not volunteer for this. Historical accounts are consistent that he was pressed into pirate service against his will, the same fate that had befallen thousands of ordinary sailors caught on the wrong ship at the wrong moment. He had a wife back in Wales. He had spent his entire adult life avoiding exactly this outcome, and now he was a captive aboard a pirate vessel with no clear way home. Then, 6 weeks later, everything changed again. Howell Davis, in the middle of an elaborate ambush against the Portuguese governor of Principe Island, was killed in a firefight. His crew, suddenly without a captain needed to choose a replacement immediately in the middle of hostile waters with an enemy garrison still shooting at them. And in that moment of crisis, the pirates of Howell Davis's crew turned to the newest, least experienced member of their company, a 40-day pirate who had been press-ganged against his will. They turned to Bartholomew Roberts. Why him? This is the detail that later chroniclers have never been able to fully explain away, and it says something important about what made Roberts different from every other captain of the Golden Age. He was literate in an era when most sailors were not. He understood navigation with a precision that few men on that ship could match, and he had a quality of composed, unshakable authority that made men trust him even in a moment of chaos. When the vote came, it was not close. Roberts, according to the surviving account, is said to have accepted the role with a line that has survived for 3 centuries because it captures something true about the psychology of a man who never asked for this life and then decided to dominate it completely. Since he had already dipped his hands in muddy water, he reasoned he might as well be a commander rather than a common man. 6 weeks earlier, he had been a captive. Now he commanded a pirate ship. He would spend less than 3 years at the head of it. In that time, he would become the most successful pirate in recorded history. The most disciplined ship on the Atlantic here is the part of the story that almost nobody expects, and it is the part that makes Roberts genuinely unlike every other pirate captain of his era. He did not run a den of drunken chaos. He ran what may have been the single most disciplined vessel afloat anywhere in the Atlantic world, pirate or otherwise, and he did it by drafting and enforcing a written code that his crew agreed to and signed. Pirate crews of the Golden Age were, in a structural sense, closer to democracies than to the rigid naval hierarchies of the era's official warships. A captain served because the crew elected him, and he could be removed the same way. Roberts understood this dynamic better than almost anyone, and instead of fighting it, he used it to build an organization with a level of order that would have embarrassed some legitimate naval vessels of the period. The rules he enforced read like something out of a strict boarding school crossed with a mutiny prevention manual. No gambling with cards or dice for money was permitted aboard the ship, a rule specifically designed to prevent the kind of resentment and violence that money disputes could trigger among armed men living in close quarters for months at a time. Lights and candles were to be extinguished at 8 o'clock at night, and any man who wanted to keep drinking past that hour had to do it up on the open deck, in the dark, away from the enclosed spaces where drunken arguments turned fastest into knife fights. Weapons had to be kept clean and ready for use at all times, an inspection standard closer to a naval regulation than anything associated with the popular image of piracy. Striking another crew member aboard the ship was forbidden entirely. Disputes were to be settled ashore with pistol and sword in a supervised duel, which meant conflicts were resolved through a controlled and survivable process rather than an unpredictable brawl below decks that could kill men the crew needed. Desertion or concealing plunder from the common stock carried the harshest punishments the code allowed, and remarkably, Roberts kept musicians aboard his ships specifically to maintain crew morale during the grinding boredom of long voyages, though even they were only guaranteed rest on the Sabbath, a small mercy carved out of an otherwise unforgiving schedule. There is a story, preserved in the accounts of men who later stood trial and testified about life aboard Roberts's ships, that captures exactly how seriously this code was enforced. A crew member was caught attempting to hide a portion of plundered silver rather than surrendering it to the common stock, as the code required. Aboard almost any other pirate vessel of the era, this kind of infraction might have been settled with a beating, or quietly ignored if the offender was popular enough with the rest of the crew. Roberts did not treat it that way. The matter was brought before the assembled company, weighed according to the written rules everyone aboard had agreed to when they signed on, and punished according to the code rather than according to the captain's personal mood. It was law, applied consistently, aboard a ship that legally did not exist. That consistency is precisely why men who had every reason to distrust one another. Strangers pulled from a dozen different nations and forced or persuaded into the same crew could function together at all. Consider what this actually means. A man who had been forced into piracy against his will took command of an organization built entirely on lawlessness and imposed upon it a level of structure, restraint, and internal accountability that many legitimate institutions of the period could not claim. This was not a captain ruling through fear alone. It was a captain who understood that discipline, applied consistently and fairly, produces loyalty that terror alone can never buy. And it worked. In under 3 years, Roberts's crews captured somewhere between 400 and 470 vessels, a number that dwarfs every other pirate of the Golden Age, including men whose names have become far more famous in popular memory. Discipline, not chaos, is what built that record. The gentleman who burned a king's fleet, Roberts, did not look like a pirate, at least not the pirate of popular imagination. Contemporary accounts describe a man who dressed with an almost theatrical formality, even in the middle of a raid, a crimson damask waistcoat and breeches, a heavy gold chain looped around his neck with a diamond cross hanging from it, a hat crowned with a red feather, a sword at his hip, and a pair of pistols slung across his shoulders on a silk sling. He looked less like a criminal and more like a nobleman who had wandered onto the wrong ship. It was, in its own way, a form of psychological warfare. A man dressed like that, commanding a crew as disciplined as his, arriving alongside your vessel with cannon run out, communicated something specific. Resistance was not just dangerous, it was pointless. His campaign moved across an enormous stretch of ocean. He raided along the coast of Newfoundland, where in a single audacious pass through the harbor at Piracy, he is said to have destroyed or captured more than 20 fishing vessels in the space of an hour, an act so devastating that it briefly crippled the entire regional fishing economy. Fishermen who survived the Piracy raid later described a scene closer to an occupation than a robbery. Roberts's ship sailing directly into the harbor mouth under full black colors, while drums and trumpets sounded from her deck, a deliberate piece of theater meant to announce that resistance had already been decided as pointless before a single shot was fired. Boats that tried to flee toward open water were simply run down and turned back. By the time the harbor fell silent again, the entire local fishing fleet, along with the small trading vessels that depended on it, had effectively ceased to exist for the season, and word of what had happened at Piracy spread along the North American coast faster than any warship could sail to counter it. He moved south into the Caribbean and struck repeatedly at shipping around Barbados and Martinique with such ferocity that the governors of both islands eventually commissioned dedicated warships specifically to hunt him down, a rare and expensive admission that ordinary naval patrols were not enough. And then, in one of the single most consequential raids of the entire golden age of piracy, he found the Portuguese treasure fleet. In the Bay of Todos os Santos off the coast of Brazil, in late 1719, Roberts and his crew came upon a fleet of more than 40 Portuguese merchant ships anchored together, waiting for their naval escort before making the crossing back to Lisbon loaded with sugar, tobacco, and colonial wealth. Roberts approached quietly, disguised his intentions, and singled out the richest-looking vessel in the anchorage. He forced her captain, under threat of immediate violence against the crew, to identify which of the 40 ships carried the greatest treasure. The answer was the Sagrada Familia, a heavily armed vessel escorting the Portuguese governor's own possessions, along with an enormous cargo of gold, sugar, and jewels, including, according to some accounts, an ornate cross set with diamonds intended for the King of Portugal himself. Roberts took her in a single decisive strike in full view of the rest of the anchored fleet and got away with the richest single prize captured by any pirate during the entire Golden Age, before the other 39 ships and their naval escort could even organize a response. It was audacity on a scale that most captains would never have attempted, and it worked completely. The flag that made merchants surrender without a fight there was another weapon in Roberts's arsenal that had nothing to do with cannon fire, and it may have been the most effective one he ever deployed. It was a flag. Most people picture a pirate flag as a single, generic skull and crossbones, and assume every captain of the era flew some version of the same design. They did not. Flags in the Golden Age functioned as branding, in the most literal sense, a visual signature that told a target exactly whose hands they had fallen into before a single shot was fired, and Roberts understood the value of that signature better than almost anyone. He is credited with at least 2 personal designs. One showed him standing with a burning sword in one hand, planted on 2 skulls, with the letters AB beneath one skull and AM beneath the other, an abbreviation historians generally read as a barbed message to the governors of Barbados and Martinique, the 2 colonies whose warships had been specifically commissioned to hunt him down. The other showed a black silhouette of Roberts himself standing alongside a skeletal figure representing death, the 2 of them together raising a toast over an hourglass, a symbol that needed no translation. Time is short, choose quickly. That image, run up a mast on the open ocean, did something that gunpowder alone never could. Merchant captains who saw it did the math instantly. They knew the reputation behind the design. They knew that resistance against Roberts's crew tended to end badly, and that surrender, by contrast, was frequently survivable, since Roberts, unlike some of his contemporaries, was not known for indiscriminate slaughter of crews who gave up without a fight. The flag was doing the work of psychological warfare before a single cannon was run out, and case after case in the surviving trial records describes merchant captains striking their colors the moment that symbol became visible on the horizon, ending an engagement that might otherwise have cost lives on both sides before it had properly begun. The hunt that cost AN Empire its patience by 1720, Roberts was no longer simply a nuisance to colonial shipping. He had become, in the eyes of the British Crown, a direct threat to the economic stability of the entire Atlantic trading system, and the response reflected that shift. The governors of Barbados and Martinique, humiliated by repeated raids they could not stop with local resources, petitioned London directly for naval assistance, and the Crown responded by authorizing the specific warships that would eventually chase Roberts across 2 oceans. Insurance rates on Atlantic shipping routes rose. Merchant houses in Bristol and London began quietly rerouting valuable cargo away from any lane Roberts had recently been sighted near. A single captain and a rotating fleet of 2 or 3 captured vessels had, through sheer volume of successful raids, created measurable disruption to the commercial infrastructure of an empire. Few criminal enterprises in any century have managed to move that particular needle. Roberts had. Every reign like this has an ending, and Roberts's ending arrived on the coast of what is now Gabon, at a place called Cape Lopez, in February of 1722. The Royal Navy had made hunting Roberts down a priority so serious that they dispatched a dedicated warship, Swallow, commanded by Captain Challoner Ogle, with a single mission: end him. On the morning of February the 10th, Roberts's flagship, the Royal Fortune, lay at anchor near a captured merchant vessel. When the Swallow was spotted approaching, Roberts's crew initially mistook her for another merchant ship worth taking, an error that would prove catastrophic. By the time they understood what was actually bearing down on them, Ogle's warship was close enough that retreat was no longer a realistic option. Roberts, according to the survivors who were later captured and tried, made a choice that tells you everything about who he had become in 3 years at sea. He did not attempt to hide or negotiate. He dressed one final time in the full crimson finery that had made him instantly recognizable across the Atlantic, the gold chain, the diamond cross, the feathered hat, and he took his position on the deck to fight. The engagement was brief and brutal. Grape shot from the Swallow's guns tore across the deck of the Royal Fortune, and a single shot struck Roberts directly in the throat. He died almost instantly at the age of 40, at the helm of a ship he had commanded through nearly 400 captures. What his crew did next has become one of the most quietly haunting details in the entire story. Rather than let his body be captured, displayed, and used as a trophy by the Royal Navy, which was the standard practice with executed and killed pirates of the era, Roberts's men wrapped him, still in his crimson coat and gold chain, and put him over the side into the Atlantic, exactly as he had reportedly instructed them to do if he were ever killed in battle. The sea took him the way it had taken so many of the ships he had captured. There was no body for Ogle to bring back to England as proof. There was no execution for the crowds. There was only the water, closing over the most successful pirate captain in history, and the wreckage of a battle that ended the most productive individual raiding campaign the Atlantic had ever seen. The survivors of his crew were not so fortunate. More than 50 of them were captured aboard the Royal Fortune and transported to Cape Coast Castle for trial. 52 were convicted and hanged in one of the largest single mass executions of pirates in the entire Golden Age, a grim bureaucratic postscript to a campaign that had, until that morning, seemed unstoppable. What the record actually says strip away the legend and look only at what the documented record shows. And Bartholomew Roberts is not simply one name among many Golden Age pirates. He is, by raw output, the outlier who makes the entire category look different. Somewhere between 400 and 470 vessels captured in under 3 years of active command is a number that no other pirate of the era, not Blackbeard, not Bartholomew's own predecessor, Howell Davis, not any of the men whose names have become far more culturally famous, comes anywhere close to matching. He achieved it not through random violence, but through a combination of tactical intelligence, calculated psychological intimidation, and an internal discipline that most legitimate military organizations of his century would have envied. He built that record as a man who never wanted the job in the first place, who was handed command in the middle of a firefight by a crew of strangers, and who chose, in that instant, to become better at piracy than anyone who came before him. His death marked the effective close of the golden age of piracy. Within a few years of Cape Lopez, sustained naval pressure, expanded convoy protection, and coordinated colonial law enforcement had broken the back of large-scale organized piracy across the Atlantic. The era that had produced Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and dozens of others effectively ended with the man who had, in the shortest amount of time, done the most damage to it. There is something worth sitting with in the shape of this story. A sober, literate, disciplined man, forced against his will into a life of crime, chose not merely to survive that life, but to master it completely, and in doing so, built an organization more orderly than most of the legitimate institutions operating around him. Whether that makes him a criminal, a leader, or something uncomfortably in between is a question that 300 years of distance has not fully settled. What Bartholomew Roberts' record does settle conclusively is this: the most successful pirate who ever lived was not the man in the movies. He was a quiet, sober, meticulously dressed Welshman who never asked for the black flag, and who, once he had it, refused to be anything less than the best who ever raised one. Think about the strangeness of that for a moment. Popular culture has spent 2 centuries building pirates into figures of chaos, rum-soaked and rule-averse, men who lived for disorder because disorder was the entire point of the flag they flew. Roberts is the evidence that the opposite was often closer to the truth. The men who lasted, who built real fortunes and real fear and real historical footprints, were not the loudest or the wildest. They were the ones who understood that an armed crew without structure collapses into its own violence long before any navy catches up with it, and that the only way to hold 400 captures together into a single coherent legacy was to run the operation with more discipline than the merchant fleets it was preying on. Roberts never drank the rum he denied his own crew after 8 o'clock. He never gambled with the money he forced the code to protect. He simply enforced the rules, wore the crimson coat, and let the reputation do half the fighting for him. And when it finally ended, it ended the way he had reportedly asked it to end. Not in a courtroom in chains, not paraded through a colonial town square for a hanging crowd to jeer at, but over the side of his own ship, into the ocean that had made him, before the enemy could turn his body into a trophy. 300 years later, there is no grave. There is only the record, the trial transcripts of the 52 men who were not thrown overboard and did not get the same mercy, and the number, 400 vessels and more, that no other pirate captain of the Golden Age has ever matched. If this story pulled you in, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and which detail about Black Bart surprised you the most. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the moment. There are more stories like this one still waiting in the archive. We will see you in the next one.